everybody, all my people out there who are watching me, thank you so very much. Oh, here at Strong Inspirations, I give it to you straight, no chaser, to intoxicate your mind, not DUI, but to have you stagger through the people who come on the show and what they share with us. So hit the subscribe button. It's free. It don't even ask no information. It just really lets me know you like me. Hit the notifications bell so you get a ding, a shock, a smoke signal, something to let you know there is new content on Strong Inspirations. Hit the like button on this. There is no love button, but you really gonna love this one. Oh, this sister gonna put it down on you. You're gonna be tripping like I did not know some of what she's gonna share coming out of some personal experience through her family. Watch out. This is going to be good, gooder than good, better than better. And then tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. Don't keep it to yourself. Let people know about here, the channel, YouTube, what have you, so that they can watch this also and be inspired, enlightened, and entertained. All right, do that, my friends. Have you seen some of the other videos, like the one I did with the lady who grew up in Mount Bayou, Mississippi, but ended up living in Europe and in Africa, and was a celebrity of sorts in those countries? Watch that video. Did you see the one I did with the lady who integrated a school in Florida and said her classmates tried to kill her one day so that she would not graduate? And she went on to get her doctorate degree. Watch that video. Did you see the one I did with the guy whose two-time great-grandfather was born enslaved? He bought his freedom, the freedom of 15 other people, and then he moves and buys land and incorporates his own town, and one of the first in America to do such. It's West Philadelphia, Illinois. Watch that video. And there's so many others. You know, everybody, that I'm a author. This is my book, Black Business Book on the Rise of Black Business in America. I take you back to the 1800s that there were enslaved Black people who owned businesses. And I got them in this book. Enslaved Black people who went to college, I got them in this book. All the way slaves enslaved gained their freedom, I got it in this book. And to be balanced, what in some of the instances the racists did to hurt Black people, it's in this book. So get you a copy of this. And I got a new book coming out very soon, titled That's My Land, on the history of Black towns and settlements. Because I got to give the stories of our resiliency, of our tenacity. And that's what that book is, and that's what this book is all about. I do public speaking, and if you need a speaker, hit me up, and I'll share some of the stories from the book. Very enlightening and kind of entertaining too, because I keep it light. And all this that I've just talked about is on my website, business, NINTHEBLACK, Business in the Black. Go there, order the book, find out if I'm in your town, invite me to your town. That's where you can get my email address and contact information. Now, you hear me use this term strong. I like the word strong. I've been saying it for a long time, since the beginning of the show and even prior to that. And in my world, strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to the strong sister on the channel today. Come on, lady. Let's get it on.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Tell us
very
your
much.
name.
My name's Kimberly France. and I
Okay.
am a historian and author of two books. One is called Black Settlements in Southern Illinois, and the other is called Africa and Egypt, the Story of Locust Grove, Illinois, which is a Black settlement that my ancestors are from.
Oh, really? Oh, we're gonna
Mhm.
get into that. Because
Yes,
that goes into, what I'm talking about, settlements across America. But
yes.
before we do that, I want the audience to get to know you, personally just a tad. So where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Carbondale, Illinois, and I put the map up here. I don't know if you can see it. This is the map of Illinois. There are 102 counties, and Carbondale is way down here. Um, and so that's where I grew up. But I grew up with my grandmother, and my grandmother used to take us to this place that we called the country, where I would see all my other relatives. And there was a church there and a cemetery, and all my family is buried there. Um, and growing up, I just thought it was family land, because I was always around family when we would visit. And it wasn't until I was well into my 50s that I discovered that that place that I knew as the country was a Black settlement, because I stumbled across a uh, cemetery directory, and there were all these names of Black families that were buried in that cemetery that I knew I wasn't related to. And so it wasn't until then that I discovered that it was a Black settlement, and I wanted to tell the story not just about my family, but about the families that live there.
Okay, now let me
Because
stop you there. We're
Mhm,
gonna get into all that. I ain't gonna lie, but I,
mhm.
I gotta get back to you. Just that. What's
Okay.
Carbondale like? What kind of town is it?
Yeah, so
Somebody.
Carbondale is a university town. It's the home of Southern Illinois University. It was it was founded in 1869 as Southern Illinois Normal University. And most of my family attended there. Some of my family members actually worked there on staff. Um, and so it's a college town that was notorious in the 70s and 80s for its Halloween parties.
Oh, really? Okay.
They are infamous.
Okay. Now it's a predominantly white town.
Yes, it's predominantly white, but it is very liberal. College towns usually are, because they have a lot of arts and a lot of transient people that come through there. And so there was always a significant Black population on the east side of town, on the east side of the railroad tracks,
So what was that
as many
neighborhood
towns
called?
are known. Uh, well, I honestly don't know. It what the town what it was called when it was a Black settlement. Only known it as Carbondale and the
Okay.
east side, but the institutions are still there. The churches that were founded early, Rock Hill Baptist Church, Bethel AME, which is the church that I grew up in, um, and the building that housed the Black school, Attucks, is still there.
Now is that the side of town you grew up on?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. And so that that side of town, how big is it? I mean, Carbondale is can't be a big city, I
So
guess. So that's a
Carbondale
small
has
town.
about 20,000 people.
Okay.
The university has about 10,000. Um, and so I would say Carbondale has ranged in terms of Black population, or between 20 and 25%
Oh,
of
okay.
the population. Mhm.
Uh, growing up there, did you interact with white people, or were you just like went to all black schools in your life? How did that go?
Yeah, so the all Black school was closed in 1966. My mother was one of the students. She was in the sophomore class when they closed the Black school Attucks and integrated everybody into the high school. I actually didn't go to high school there. I had left town and moved with my family to Indiana. But growing up, we had kindergarten, K through three schools, 4 to 6, and then the junior high was seventh and eighth grade. And so everybody went to the junior high school, and I left when I graduated 8th grade.
What was the side of the town where the white people live? Was that more prosperous? Was that like was the black side kind of a, I don't know, for lack of a better term, the ghetto side of town, so to speak? What was that take?
Well, so I would say, because I'm in my mid 50s, so when I came up, there was the sense that the divisions were starting to erode. So I had two best friends growing up, a white girl and a black girl, and they both lived on the white side of town. So
Oh, really?
there were black people that started to move on the other side of the railroad tracks, if you will, and it
Okay.
was considered more prosperous. But I would say that, like I said, you could tell that the segregation was eroding because a lot of the black businesses that thrived on the east side were starting to disappear as I was coming up. But
Oh, really?
in my mother's generation, like I said, all the black businesses. My aunt owned a lounge, a dry cleaners. There was a black barber shop. Miss Schaffner used to sell candy
Right.
from the porch of her house. So there was a black grocery store, a black
Oh, I love it.
uh, gas station. But
Yeah.
like I said, as I was coming up, those entities were starting to erode um,
Uh,
as
let me ask you
integration was.
this.
Mhm.
Excuse me for interrupting you.
Oh, that's okay.
Was there a main street that the black
Yes,
businesses were on?
yes. So the nickname that I grew up knowing it as was called the Levee. So it was Washington Street because it ran parallel to the railroad. So it kind of divided the east and west sides of town.
All right.
Um, and you could take it all the way up to campus to SIU.
Okay.
So there was like a 2 block radius, 2 or 3 block radius in on Washington Street where those black business where most of those black businesses were.
How did your family get there? Was there a major industry that employed a lot of black people?
Yes. So again, we're talking Southern Illinois. So the primary industry that started the black settlements was farming. Um, and we're talking, 1800s. So but how my family got to Carbondale was, like I said, my grandmother, she was one of 12. So they grew up in the country, which was Williamson County, in this black settlement. And she married a man who worked for the railroad, my grandfather. And the railroad was a significant industry that employed a lot of black people. But you've got to remember, back in this time, there were a lot of railroads that were built in the 1800s that a lot of the commerce was really east to west. So it was Missouri to Kentucky through Illinois,
Okay.
Illinois, Indiana railroads. So a lot of those railroads aren't in use today.
Yeah, true.
Um, but they were in use because they were built around mining, manufacturing to move goods in and
Yeah,
out of
I see what you're saying.
and between towns. So the town,
What did they you said they worked at the railroad. What was the jobs that black people could have?
well, so in the beginning, they were actually laying the tracks.
Oh,
When the railroads were first being built, but along the time that my grandmother and her husband moved to Indiana, so those railroads were long in operation, and so they were mostly porters on the railroad. You've heard the
on
term
the
Pullman
train.
porters, yeah, and that's the Chicago, from the Pullman family. But again, these railroads ran all through Illinois from
I
south to
see.
central. I mean, mhm.
one more question on that. Now, where's the enslavement at in your family? Where's the southern roots?
Yeah. So um, the enslavement that I found in my family is still on this same family line. So it was my mother's 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 mother, my great great grandmother. Um, her maiden name was Harrison, and their family, my great great grandmother and her siblings, were on a plantation owned by a man named William Gray, and the plantation was outside of Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's where the first link to slavery comes from. And then if you go back further, so that's we're talking um, mid 1800s, so
Okay.
1840s, 50s. But if you go back before that, then the belief is that those Harrisons were from the president's Harrison's family who had
Oh,
a
is that
plantation.
right?
Yes, who had a plantation in Virginia. Um,
Oh,
yeah, and
okay.
so then that takes you back to the early, or I'm sorry, not early, late 1700s. Um,
How did you get to have an appreciation? Were you taught Black history in grade school and through high school? How did this come about for you?
yeah, I think like most people in my era, the extent of our Black history was Martin Luther King Jr., George Washington Carver, and a couple of others. And so, I do remember celebrating Black History Month in school and, reading a book and writing a book report. But the extent to which Blacks were uh, settled and engaged in the state of Illinois is something that I didn't learn until I started researching my family history and wrote these books. So I would say that largely the 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 majority of that Black history is remains untold.
As a result of that, Illinois being where it's located was
Mhm.
not too far from the Confederate
Right, right.
communities. So it
Yes.
has a unique history in itself.
It does. And it's one, I'm glad you brought that up because it's one that I think that we don't talk about enough. So the over the years, the federal government in the early years had projects through the uh, WPA, Workers Progress Association, where they actually had hearings on Capitol Hill where they would record slave narratives. But if you look at those really only covered Southern states, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. But you're not going to find slave narratives or stories about slavery in Illinois because most people didn't believe that slavery existed. And it did, in fact, exist in Illinois. There were Black codes or slave laws that said, a Black person who came into the state couldn't remain there more than 10 days. And even in the or original or earlier versions of the Constitution. I can't remember if it's the 1818 or the 1823 version of Illinois' Constitution. It allowed for slavery in Gallatin County for the purpose of employing enslaved people to work in the salt mines because the salt mines were a significant economic engine in Illinois in its early years. So Illinois didn't become a state until 1818, but they did allow for slavery. And Illinois also was previously, so of course, even by virtue of the name, we're acknowledging the indigenous tribes that existed before Illinois became a state and part of the United States. But even before this country became a country, that territory had been owned by the French. It had been owned by Great Britain, and slavery was allowed and practiced very heavily during those times, which is why most of the earliest Black settlements are in Randolph County, and places where the French and British has settled.
And that's indicative of their abolitionist attitudes for there to be Black settlements.
Well, so
because if it's legal to have slavery, how are there settlements for Black people?
So because while slavery was legal, whether it was the French that was in charge, or the British, or the European settlers that later came when it became the United States of America, Europeans didn't want to live among Black people. So,
right.
so like I said, I'm one of those people who doesn't really care for the focus on the Underground Railroad, because to me that implies transience, and not everybody went north to Chicago or Detroit or Canada or even west. And so that's why I like the term Black settlements, because it centers the Black families that actually made a life and home in Illinois. Like I said, sometimes before the state became a state, sometimes before the country was a country. But there is
that's a little known
significant,
fact. Most people don't know that, I'm sure.
right. There's significant history of Black settlement in Illinois. And in fact, another thing that most people don't know that I just discovered in my research. So Kaskaskia was the first capital of Illinois when it became a state in 1818. But in 1743, when the French owned it, or were in that area before the United States was the United States, there is a Liberty Bell in Kaskaskia that is older than the Liberty Bell that we celebrate in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for me, it was one of the great joys to actually travel there and see it for myself. Because it was something that, like I said, I knew nothing about, and I certainly don't remember learning about it in school.
Now there's another community that extends in that maybe that same time period. It's Brooklyn, Illinois.
Yes. So, like I said, my book focuses on the southern.
Yeah. Show us the book.
Counties.
We'll cover
but
both.
No, I'm only saying that because I wanted to point out that the reason that I focused on the lower 16 is because nobody talks about the settlements there. I didn't include Madison County or St. Clair County, which is where Brooklyn is, because that was one that has been talked about and books have been written about. So Brooklyn is one of those Black settlements that was incorporated in 1838, I believe, that still exists. Another, you mentioned New Philadelphia, that's more central Illinois. And what was so mind-blowing to me is, as I started researching families and following where families lived, where they were on the different census records, that's when I discovered that there were so many more Black settlements than we'd ever really talked about. And I discovered there was at least one Black settlement in every one of the counties that I researched. And then once I published the book and started meeting more people and visiting more museums and things in Illinois, that's when I realized there is at least one Black settlement in every one of the 102 counties in Illinois.
Explain to us, what is a settlement? What's the makeup of these communities?
Yeah. So the way I defined Black settlement is different from the way other authors. So I read a book called The Bone and Sinew of the Land, where they describe Black settlement as anywhere they could find a Black person who owned land. And so that's one way of describing it, because those people were, like I said, farmers, and they, worked the land and they lived off the land. But the way I described it was I would go to either the 1850 census or the 1860 census, because those were prior to 13th Amendment being passed. So Blacks were not free in this
Right.
country.
Right.
And I would write down every Black or mulatto name that I found in the census for that county. And then I would go to the county history, and if I could find evidence of a church, a school, and from the names on the census, I would search the death records and find the cemeteries. So to me, a Black settlement is anywhere where there were Black families who built those three institutions. They had a church, a school, and a
I
cemetery.
love it. I love it.
And in most cases, it started with the church, because the church was usually on the grounds where the cemetery was.
Right.
And the church was usually the place not only where they worshiped, but also where the schools began. So they
Right.
would start the schools in the church. And then
Right.
as the schools grew, they would usually build a separate building. And I found evidence of a church, a school, and a cemetery, at least one of each in every one of those counties. And like I said, since publishing the book, I believe that's true for the entire state of Illinois.
What now? Well, how did they obtain the land? Was it homestead, or did they actually have to
Mm-hmm.
buy it, or
Mm-hmm. Great
some
questions.
governmental policies?
Yeah, so it varies. It depends on the county, because different counties, the families that settled in the different counties, many of them came from different places. So some came from Tennessee, some came from Kentucky, some came from North Carolina, Mississippi. So it depends on how they got to where they are. But in most cases, there was a man who served in a war, either Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Spanish American War, Civil War, and as payment for service, many of them received land patents, which were plots of land.
Oh,
Because, like
really?
I said,
Okay.
it depends on the time frame. So, Revolutionary War in Williamson County, there is a John Ellis was a Black man who served in the American Revolution, who got land as a result of that service, um, and settled a Black settlement called Ellisville, which is in the town of New Denison, which is in Williamson County. And again, so it depends on the county, but many of the men got land for serving in a war. Others purchased the land. Another one that covered Franklin and Williamson County was a man named M.D. Easton, Marshall D. Easton. He was the real estate baron of his era, because he owned thousands of acres of land
This is a
in
Black guy.
this is a Black man in Williamson County, and I was able to find a lot of the deeds where he had purchased the land from people,
How did he get
sometimes
his
other
money?
Black people.
Did you see that?
Honestly, I don't know how he got his money. I was not able to trace it back that far. I
Okay.
don't know how he got his money, but he was definitely a land baron of the times.
Now, these people, when we're talking about it, again, are these people get slavery and then be able to find it as a community with some say, or is this after slavery, or yeah, what's that dynamic in most
Great
instances?
question. And so I make the point in the book that slave versus free is really, for the Black person, was a distinction without a difference. And the reason that I say that is because even before the 13th Amendment was passed, and even after the 13th Amendment was passed, if you're talking about Illinois from the early 1800s all the way up to about 1955, it didn't really matter whether you could trace your ancestry to slavery or not. And I say that because the conditions that Black people had to deal with were the same. So whether you were slave or free, whether you were listed in the census or not, whether you could vote or not, you still ran the risk before the Civil War of being kidnapped and forced to work in the salt mines, or being kidnapped and taken south and sold into slavery, whether you were enslaved and escaped or whether you were free. That was, and I also document in the book, there was one instance in Williamson County in the settlement where my family's from. I think it was 1848. There was a woman named Rachel Watson who was kidnapped off of her family land. She was at home and taken away and never found again. And the reason that I learned about it was because another author had written about it, and I was able to find the letter where someone from that county had written to, I guess, the governor of at the time, or someone had written to someone asking, if they could locate her and return her home. And so, yes. Man. And the reason that many of these settlements ended were because of incidents of racial violence. So lynchings, people's homes being burned out, their businesses being burned out.
Okay, stop right there. Give us an example of one of those instances. I know it's not nothing on the level of Tulsa or what have you, but what's one that comes to mind?
Okay, the first one that comes to mind is El Dorado, Illinois. And the reason I mentioned El Dorado is it's in Saline County. There was a historically Black college there. Most people don't know Illinois had actually two historically Black colleges that I could find. One was in Springfield called Ambidexter, and the one in El Dorado was called the El Dorado Normal and Industrial Institute. So these HBCUs were patterned after Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Institute. So they had the normal and industrial in the name. This school opened in 1902 and it closed in 1902 because a mob of white people threatened all the Blacks to leave town. And many of them, shot into their homes, threw rocks into their homes. And the students weren't able to graduate because of a racial violent incident that happened. The governor called in the guard. I don't think it was called the National Guard per se, but they called in the militia. And
to squelch, to slow down the protests, or to hurt Black people even more?
They wanted the Black people out of town. They wanted them out of town. They wanted the school closed because they felt, and when I say they, the white mob didn't want the Blacks to, because the schools were training to farm, to work the mines, the coal mines, to, build the railroads, and they didn't want the Blacks to have those jobs. And so they literally ran the Blacks out of town through a series of violent incidents.
Wow. Yeah. That happens every so often.
Mm-hmm.
When you do this research, let me go back to this. As a researcher, how do you research? For people who want to know that. I mean, I know there's some Google things nowadays and so on and so forth, but it's also and I'm gonna let you do the answer today.
Okay, so I will answer, but I want to give the caveat that I didn't learn this until I was halfway through. And the reason I say that is because
halfway through researching your family.
Yes, because I started out only researching my family. I didn't set out to research Black settlements and write a book. It was only that I discovered that the existence of these Black settlements hadn't been talked about that I decided to write the books, because I wanted it. I wanted the history recorded. So the way that one would do it if they're researching their families or these settlements is Illinois has, through the Secretary of State, archived databases. So the death certificates are searchable for free. And the marriage certificates are searchable online for free. The difference between when I started and now is when I was doing the research, there was one of the death databases that covered 1916 to 1950, where they would display the race column. So if I was looking for an Allen ancestor or a Stewart ancestor or a Harrison ancestor, which are all common names, I could find the Black people through that research. They have since removed, when they updated it, and so it's now from 1916 to 1972, they no longer display the race column. So you have to know the name, and you have to know how the name is spelled, because our names were misspelled a lot on census records, marriage certificates, death certificates. So you have to know all the different variations of spelling, but I would recommend you start there. Also looking at the census records for the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, gives you a lot of information. The 1880 census will also tell you street names, will tell you the streets that they lived on. So that will give you a geographic picture of where the settlements were, because again, all the Blacks lived together in those times because white people didn't want, unless the person like worked on somebody's farm or was a servant and lived in there, but even then, most of the time they didn't live in the house. They lived, outside the house or upstairs or, in a segregated area. So those are the places that you can start searching. Newspapers, I would find a lot of information whenever there was a racial incident. Those things were chronicled in newspapers. You could find a lot of information there. When people died or got married, a lot of times that was published in the newspapers. So I got a lot of information.
Okay, let me stop you there. When you say in the newspapers, there's document on digital online, because those I guess those newspapers might be out of business now.
Oh yes, all of them are.
That publish.
Yes.
I mean, where is that at? It's in the libraries or what?
Yeah, so you'd have to know the name of the newspaper, but a lot of them are on newspapers.com.
Oh, really? Okay.
And another place to get a good newspaper data is going to the county libraries or to the county historical societies. A lot of times the historical societies are in the libraries, or they have donated. If they don't have their own building, their information is in the libraries. And a lot of those old newspapers are still in print that way, even though they're no longer, actively published.
And let me ask you this: as a, and we're gonna get to the books at this point. As a young child, you didn't know that was a settlement that your family lived on. You
right? I thought it was family land because we went there every Memorial Day. We had barbecues there. I remember playing in the church before it was torn down. I remember running down the hill to the outhouse. I remember, like we would run through the cemetery.
it was because called we what?
Huh?
What was the name of
it? And that's another good question. So when it first started, it was called Africa. The settlement was called Africa in the early 1800s, like around 1812 or so. It had other names. It was called Fancy Farm. It was called Skelton Town because there were some Black residents, elders that lived there. And then when Williamson County was formed and the post office was moved, the post office was named Locust Grove. And then that settlement became known as Locust Grove. But that was later. So like I said, the Blacks were already there and settled, and then they moved the post office. And so that's how it got its name, Locust Grove.
So in this instance, at the beginning of Africa, the Blacks were the first to be there on this land for the most part.
Well, so that's a great question, and something else that's also debated. So the Blacks didn't go there by themselves, but there are some historians who say that the white settlers built the houses and the land for the Black people that were enslaved there, and I don't buy that. So there were Blacks who accompanied white people because they were either enslaved or indentured servants when they went there to Illinois. And then this is more of a general statement for the settlements in Illinois. Some people, like Governor Coles, brought his enslaved with him when he went to Edwardsville, and he set his enslaved free and gave them land. So depending on who the settlers were and how they came to Illinois, like I said, some were religious groups from churches. So they were taking the Black people from places like Virginia, North Carolina, where slavery was still a common practice, and they wanted to free them. So they traveled with them. But again, the reality is once they got to Illinois and settled, the Black people settled their own communities.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things that, and this is going to be a question, we don't know how all this kind of played out. We only think of slavery in kind of one or two areas, but there's a lot of gray area, and you're alluding to that in terms of maybe some enslavers were, I don't know if I could say a nice person, but maybe not as bad as others in terms of the brutality, or then the Black people found a way to escape and found their own communities, or the enslaver allowed them to have some community of their own, and maybe a little bit of autonomy.
Yeah, and it's a great point, and I have to admit, as a historian, I had to really not entertain those conversations and not go there, because it's very painful to read about the lynchings and the people that sued for their freedom and a lot of the atrocities that people endured. So I would never venture to say that life was good for anyone, because like I said, I can't attest to the constant threat that they lived under every day. When somebody would just decide they felt you had too much, or they wanted to take what you had, or you didn't deserve to have what you had. So I'll give you an example. I found a court case because it involved my family, where somebody actually showed me the court case. And it was called Jane Grey, grandmother of a slave. And it was about this woman named Jane Grey, who I am somehow related to. She came from Kentucky on that plantation that I talked about earlier. When she died, she was in Illinois and she owned land. And there was a man named Isham Harris who sued her husband. And
he's a white guy.
I'm not sure whether he was white or Black. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But he sued her husband and a slew of my ancestors to put them off the land. And as the court case developed and people were deposed, there was a man named Charles Shelby who produced letters that proved that he was her granddaughter. He was her grandson, and therefore was entitled to the land. And so this Isham Harris guy lost the case. He didn't succeed in putting all of my ancestors and these people off the land, but that was in 1892. In 1894, I think, a year or two later, after the court case, I came across an article where her husband, her widower, Jesse Gray, died because he fell off a horse cart going into town to sell his goods. Now, again, these people were skilled farmers. I find it very hard to believe that his horse just ran away and,
right.
You know, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Again,
So,
he for legal purposes, he was free. You know, he lived on the land, as did my ancestors, but you know, knowing how he died, I can't imagine that their life was all that peaceful. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Now, as a result of what happened in that instance, then did the guy, because the widower died or killed or whatever we might assume, did he end up taking
no one was ever tried.
But did he take the land from him at that point?
I don't think so, because I honestly believe that it's the same land that's in my family to this day.
Oh,
so
really?
We have deeds going back to the latest deeds were 1921, where my great grandfather was deeded land in 4 different deeds. So
okay.
And then there is another Black family that we're not related to that still lives in that area and has significant land there. So
Now, the book, the first one that you talked about, or you've spoken about so far, the one in Africa. Show us that cover again.
Yeah. So this is the cover, and this is, I don't know if you can actually see it. This is the actual church. And it sits on the land where the cemetery is, where my family's buried. My mother's buried there. Like I said, my grandmother, my great grandmother, my great great grandmother, they're all there.
And is that near Carbondale?
It's about 25, 30 miles from Carbondale. It's about a 45-minute drive.
Why did you title the book what you did?
Yes, because anybody that knows anything about the Southern Illinois region knows that the nickname has always been Egypt or Little Egypt. And that goes back to the 1800s. And that's not Black people calling it that. That's the white people calling it that. That's the name that it's always had. And so that's why I chose that title, because Africa, like I said, was an earlier name of the settlement, and Egypt is the region that it sits in. Yeah.
But then you have to explain, because when I saw it, I was kind of confused. When I saw it, then you have to explain, no, this is not Africa, the continent, or Egypt, the nation. This is in Illinois.
Right.
Is there a historical marker there?
Yes and no. There is a historical marker because I purchased it myself, but it has not yet been placed up there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You went through the means to get the approval to put one. You did the write-up for the marker, the whole shop?
Yep. I did the write-up. So I incorporated a nonprofit, did the research, submitted the application, and paid for it. Yeah. And actually I put a picture of it in the book.
Okay. And it just has not been installed as of yet.
It just hasn't been installed. Yeah.
How long did it take you to write that book?
So good question. I started the research in earnest in 2021. I wrote this book first, but as I was doing the research, I would say about 2022 2003 is when I had the full picture of all the Black settlements in Southern Illinois. And because I thought that was a much more compelling story, I ended up publishing this book first. So I submitted it in 2023. It was published in 2024. And then after this one was published, I went back and published the one that I had written first. And
Is
so
there
I
is
would
there a
say to,
ha-ha moment when you do this research that
oh
really
man,
sticks out that you say, wow, that you want to share with us?
so many. The like I said, some of the earlier ones that come to mind were the El Dorado school, and finding out that my great grandparents were actually in El Dorado at the time because I went back on their marriage certificate. They were listed as residents of El Dorado, and so finding out that there was a Black settlement there because most of the places, so Carbondale, Cairo are exceptions because there are significant Black populations still in those towns. But places like El Dorado, New Denison, Carmi are places where now you're not going to see any Black people if you go there. And so to know that there were Black settlements and full Black communities, there were so many Black people in Carmi, they had 4 Black churches. And to know that there aren't any Black people there now, to me, those were revelatory. And that's honestly what compelled me to write that second book. And there are a lot of mistakes in it because I was in such a hurry to tell the story. Because I'm like, if something happens to me before I get this published, people
I
are never
got you.
going to know because
I got you.
they never talked about it. And it wasn't taught. And if I could say one hope that I have is that by putting this research in print, I'm hoping that it will change how not Black history, but how history is taught in Illinois. Because I believe that these Black families deserve the credit for the contributions that they made. Because many of these settlements, Carrier Mills is another example of a town where the Lakeview community was the Black settlement that was in existence and thriving there before Carrier Mills, the town, was even incorporated. And so I'm hoping that that becomes a part of the history that we teach.
Right.
Yeah.
When we talk about some of these settlements, like let's say, for example, we're going to stay on the one in Africa. How many residents did it have in its heyday?
Hmm. Good question. So, like I said, when I found the cemetery directory, there were 40 families on 40 different last names. So I would say in the heyday, probably 400 or 500.
Oh, that
Um,
many.
yeah. Because again, this was a time when, farming was a business that fed your family and that
Right.
fed, your generations, or, being a laborer, working on railroads, working in coal mines, working in steel mills, the men in the family had those jobs. And so they were able to sustain very large families. Most of these families had 10, 12 people.
Okay, I got you. I
So,
got
and
you.
then the women, when they would um, grow up and marry, they would tend to move to and settle wherever their husbands were employed.
Okay.
Um, so, yeah, there were very large settlements. Mm-hmm.
In any one of these, and maybe the one in particular in the Africa, did, have you done or hope happens or does it happen where there's a descendants come back and like a remembrance, a big
Yeah.
cookout,
Yes.
lack of
Yes.
the word picnic, any of those kind of
Yes.
things that, and
Yes.
and then and then with that, and you're saying yes, and is
Mm-hmm.
that something that other people can come to say, hey, let's go down there at this time because there's something
Yes.
happening?
So, like I said, for the Allen families that are my ancestors, there are two settlements, one in Africa, which is the Locust Grove one, and one in Carrier Mills or Lakeview. Those are two distinct Allen lineages, and their barbecues have always been on Memorial Day, the Memorial Day weekend. And those have continued to this day because not everybody left. There's always significant numbers of family members who have remained in the area and keep those traditions alive. I know in Massac County, the Krim family, they still have gatherings. In Pope County, they're I forget what they call it, but they have a family reunion event. So yes, there are still several Black settlements where the descendants still commemorate and have gatherings. And some are every year, some are every other year, but yes.
Were you a historian before you started doing this journey?
No.
I mean,
Not at
so this is
all.
not your career. This is just
No,
something
no,
that you
this is
just
not
kind
how
of
I
took
pay the
on and
bills.
just started jamming with it.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where for me, I interpreted it as God's call on my life because I had lost my
Oh,
mom.
I love it.
And my mom was the person that if she were still here, this is what she would have done. And so
Oh, okay, I
I
love it.
felt my mom had been gone 10 years before this happened. And what started it was her brother, my uncle, had been diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer. And so I started researching our family because on my grandmother's marriage certificate, I discovered that her marriage to my grandfather was her second marriage. And I never knew that growing up. And so he and I had a conversation about that. And so I started doing the research to find out who my grandmother's first husband was. That's how this whole thing started.
Okay.
And my uncle died shortly after that. So when I was very early in the research, and I just kept going out of a sense of, obligation to him and to my mom. And so,
Okay. Okay, I
um,
love it.
yeah.
Have you received any awards or anything like that, accolades, or and do you speak around the community or otherwise sharing
Oh,
this?
right. So awards, no, absolutely not. But I have spoken. So for the last couple of years, so like 2024 and most of this year, I would go to the different historical societies on invitation, people that invited me to speak. I would go to the different historical societies or the organizations that invited me, and I would give presentations either about the book in general, the things that I learned, or if it was a specific county, I would talk about the history that I found in that county, those Black
Right.
settlements that were there.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of things. One of the counties that I didn't include in the book was Jefferson County, which is where Mount Vernon, Illinois is the county seat. And I was invited to speak to their historical society. And it was so wonderful because I actually found the link because they had an Africa settlement as well. And as it turns out, the settlements that had the same names had white settlers that had ties to both places. So the settlements had a religious history to them. I think it was the Methodist Church, the people from the Methodist Church that traveled to both settlements.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
got you.
yeah, so there's a link between Africa in Thompsonville and the Africa in Mount Vernon.
I
Yep.
guess as we come to a close, is there a question that I have not asked you something that, and then we're going to, and then also tell us the website and how people can get the book and that kind of thing.
Okay. A question you haven't asked me. I can't really think of one. I'm just
Okay.
looking at my notes to see. Oh, well, I do want to say this, because a lot of people don't think they have ties because usually if they did, if when they were alive, they don't remember coming to Illinois, they don't necessarily know that they have ties or have ancestors that were in Illinois. So I would encourage people to read the books, because in each county I list those surnames that were in the census records. And like I said, the one in the Africa one was most important to me because, like I said, when I saw these other 40 families and knew that I had grown up here, not ever meeting and talking with those other 40 families, I wanted to make sure that those 40 families um, had been acknowledged. I wanted their names called. I wanted their histories written to the extent that I could. So whatever information I had, I printed it in here. Um, so yeah.
Okay.
In terms of where they can get the books, um, Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
Um, and Barnes and Noble has an ebook version of the Black Settlements book.
Okay.
So
Are you what's okay, now that you've done this, what's next? I mean, are you looking for something else,
yeah,
book wise, history wise, to add, maybe that will add to this, or are you going
yeah.
to another state? Or yeah, tell us
Well,
that.
so this has been such an incredible journey for me. My hope is that everyone who has ties to the, well, not just to Southern Illinois, to that region, but anywhere in Illinois, I hope that they publish their own books because I really believe that this history, that there's so much more to it than has been uncovered and published. Um, I have had the pleasure of meeting so many other people who have researched and published their stories. I met John Baker from Tennessee, who wrote about the Wessington plantation. I've met a lot of people in Kentucky who've been very gracious in sharing with me um, that slavery side and the all the goings on in the Hopkinsville area. I've met people who've published about their indigenous ancestry in Oklahoma and other places. Um, and meeting you and knowing that you're publishing a book um, on all of the states, because like I said, I firmly believe that there is at least one Black settlement in every state in this country, and
Oh
probably
yeah.
more than one
Oh, for
in
sure.
many of the states. And so knowing that that information is going to be published is very important to me. And I'm glad that you're doing it. And
Yes.
so I've met a lot of other people in who have history about other settlements in Illinois. Uh, I'm
Some that
hoping.
you didn't even know about, maybe.
Oh yeah, there were tons I didn't know about. Like I said, there is at least one Black settlement in every county, and there are 102 counties in Illinois. Um,
Mm.
and so I'm hoping somebody else will publish the book, but if they don't, then I probably will publish all the stuff that I've gathered, because once I published the books, I didn't stop researching. So I still travel to different places and take pictures and document history and
Okay.
look through census records and stuff like
I
that.
got you.
So,
Yeah, no, it's always ongoing.
oh,
I will say this: my book, because I ain't gonna lie to you, I'm not as proficient as you. I list these towns, but all I say is who was kind of the founder or
mhm,
group of
mhm,
people. If
mhm,
there's one or two people I
mhm,
identify, when the date
mhm,
it was established,
mhm, mhm,
does it still exist,
mhm, mhm.
and where is it in relationship to a larger city?
But that's enough because
Oh yeah,
that
no,
gives
yeah,
people a place to start,
yeah,
because
yeah,
you
oh
give
yeah, no
one
question.
name And
Yeah.
so all they have to do is start with that census record.
Yeah.
And then they'll find the other names, the other Blacks and mulattoes. And then from
Yeah.
there, they can look at death certificates, marriage certificates. And
Yes.
then
There
they
you
have
go.
time frame. They can then go to the newspapers
Yes.
and find. So that's enough, because that
Yes.
is, and that was what I tried to do with these books, to give people enough to start with and to
Yes.
know where to go from that. But
Okay.
I just remembered another thing that I wanted to mention that I haven't been able to let go of is, so a discovery for me was my great great grandfather, Timothy Stewart, served in the 29th US Colored Troops in the Civil War. And that was a regiment that was raised entirely of Illinois Black men. And I was able to go to the archives and get the records to see where those folks went, when they were in active duty. And they made it to the shores of Galveston on July 1st. So a few days after Juneteenth, their regiment was in Galveston, and they stayed there until November of 1865, long after the war ended, and then they mustered out. So I was able to find my ancestral connection to Juneteenth. But what I realized in the research is that there were several different Emancipation Day celebrations.
Oh yeah.
Texas is known for Juneteenth
That's right.
and the significance of that date, but the other places that celebrated Emancipation Days, I believe, relates to the significance of either where the people came from. So those that came from the Caribbean or the West Indies tend to celebrate Emancipation Day in August, because
Right.
that's when they were freed. In the District of Columbia, their Emancipation Day celebrations is in
That's
April.
right.
And
That's right.
so I believe that there is a lot more history there.
Yes.
So when we find these Black settlements and then we discover when their Emancipation Day celebrations were, and I think that will give us more insight into their ancestors and the journey that they had, because not
Yes.
everybody came from Africa.
Yes.
And then the
Yes.
other thing that was surprising to me was, like I said, when I was looking at these 1850 and 1860 census records, many of them would say where the individual was born, but it
Right.
would also list where their mother and father was born. And I expected, because it was so early, I expected a lot of those mothers or fathers to have been born in Africa.
Right.
And I'll be honest, I saw very few. And to
Really?
yes, because that is a testament to how significant and how far back our history in this country goes. Because most of these folks, again, even in 1850 and 1860, were 2 and 3 generations removed from Africa or the Caribbean
Right. Right. Right.
or
Right.
whatever shores they came from. So a lot of the folks in Illinois, like I said, came from other states. So whether there was slavery involved that caused their transportation from the other state to here, you still have to go back much further to actually be able to trace us to our
Yeah.
origin
Yeah. Yeah.
of
I
Africa.
got you. Now, on a personal, do you have a website that people follow you? I mean, don't
I
give no telephone numbers and all that, but still.
No, I don't. And I'll be
Okay.
honest, because I never set out to do this, I haven't really developed an online person. I'm not on any social media or
Okay.
anything
So,
like that. So
all right.
I don't have an answer for that. I could just tell people how to get the book.
Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna put all that in the description.
Okay.
And there'll be a way to reach her if you want her to come speak, not just in Illinois, but I'm sure you'll travel. That will help
Yes.
other people maybe understand this
Yes.
of
Yes.
how to do it in their own particular communities. We put all
Yes.
that there. I
Yes.
thank you so very much for coming on the
Thank
show.
you. Thank
Oh
you.
man, I told everybody I told you was gonna like this one, and it
Well,
was very enlightening. Very
I'm
enlightening.
so grateful to be a part of this. And I think what you've done is just phenomenal. And I'm really looking forward to your
Yeah.
book, and
Yes,
hopefully
yes,
that'll launch a whole new
yes,
avenue for you. So
yes,
thank you
yes.
very
Well,
much.
hey, thank you so very much. It's a labor of love, and we'll stay in touch
Yes,
in that
yes.
regard because uh, the people and I interviewed the great two-time great grandson of Frank McWhorter, who
Hmm, hmm,
started the West
hmm.
Philadelphia
Yeah, New
community in
Philadelphia. Hmm, hmm,
New
hmm.
Philadelphia,
Yeah.
and they have a remembrance in September.
Hmm, hmm,
And I was
hmm,
supposed to go to that this year, just didn't
hmm.
make it, but it's on my calendar for 2026.
Yeah.
And I can put you in touch with him and maybe y'all can
Yeah,
dialogue.
I actually know how to get in touch with him because they do a lecture series online every month. And
Oh,
so I've spoken to him
you're talking about Gerald.
when I've
Yeah, right,
listened to
right, right.
their lectures.
Okay,
But
well,
I'm glad you brought that up because that brings up another issue that I want to highlight for your viewers. Um, Not everybody has the same story, which is another reason that I want more families to publish their own stories. The McWhorters with New Philadelphia went the way of registering on the Underground Railroad and becoming part of the National Park Service. And what that involves is you have to give up the land. You turn over the land to the federal government. Miller Grove is a National Park Service site in Southern Illinois in Polk County. Um, my family, and I know the families in Lakeview and the families in Massac County, there are several families or descendant families who still own significant acreage of land. And we don't want our land to turn over our land to the federal government because we don't want to ever lose that land. We want to keep it in the families.
I
And
got you.
what I hope will happen is that there will be some people who will be entrepreneurial enough to incorporate, put these plots into real estate trusts and begin using the land to develop generational wealth. So have server farms or dairy farms or cattle farms or data farms on this land so that the land stays in the family, but that the land begins to generate income
I love it.
for the generations to come. And
I
so
love it.
I hope that somebody will do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, well, that's a good note. Again, thank you so very much for
Thank
coming
you.
on.
Thank
We're
you.
going to put more information there. Everybody go to my website,
Yes.
businessintheblack.net. Get your copy of the book, find out where I'm speaking, so on and so forth. And to you, my sister, and I mean this with all sincerity, I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love how you have pivoted, and that we're gonna call it that, for what you
Yeah.
did prior to becoming the scholar that you are today,
Thank you.
the
Thank you very
historian,
much.
the author.
Thank you.
And that you and I you didn't use this term, but I'm gonna say it, genealogist too.
Thank you.
Yeah, because you studied your family and
Yes.
so on and so forth. That's a beautiful thing.
And I put theirs in because I didn't think anybody else would want that information. I put that in a separate book so
There
that
you
my
go.
family won't have to duplicate the research that I've already done for
Boom.
our family.
There you go. Thank you so very much for coming on.
Thank
I'll
you.
stay in touch and we'll
Yes.
talk again.
Okay. Have a
Bye bye.
wonderful day. Thank you.
Uh-huh.